One of the key features of monopoly market structure that we didn't see in the competitive market structure is that there must be some barriers to entry. Otherwise, we're going to see later that it's possible for monopoly firms to earn greater than zero economic profits sustainably. And this only could be because there's some impediment to entry. And so when we think about the monopoly market structure, it's time well spent to think about barriers to entry. So let's think about this. Barriers to entry. And for those of you who have read the chapter carefully, you'll recognize that the example of a government franchise, a government license, comes from Yosemite, where not wanting to have a ton of different commercial operations in Yosemite Valley, the government has said, okay, there's only going to be one, and we're going to make sure we're going to give the contract to one firm, and we're going to enforce that monopoly, but we're also going to limit what kinds of things they can do. We're going to specify what kind of designs they can use to some degree, but there's some price regulation. Anyway, they give that franchise in return for acceptance of some conditions that they have. Anyway, there's a few different types of entry, and this screencast will just give you a quick overview. The first barrier to entry that I'm just going to say a quick word on is control over key input. And it could be inputs. Anyway, I've got this picture of De Beers who is trying to get you to spend 2 months' salary on the diamond ring, this useless rock that will get in the way of everything you ever do with your hands. I'm not a big jewelry fan, in case you didn't notice. My poor wife. Anyway, De Beers is this group of individual diamond producers that have banded together to behave together as a monopolist. And the fact that any time a diamond mine is discovered, and say when we opened up, the Iron Curtain fell down and the Soviet Union became Russia and became open to the West, there were a lot of diamond mines in Russia. Who knew? But De Beers was the first one in almost, and went to those diamond mine controllers, whoever they were, and said, "Hey, we have an offer that will make you rich and keep us rich, and who's to lose?" Except for the sap spending 2 months' salary on this rock. Anyway, De Beers strictly limits the number of diamonds it releases for sale in the markets. So that restriction of output is something that we'll see a monopolist will do. And the reason why they don't have to worry about competition is that there's no diamond producer of any significance that isn't in this De Beers cartel. In the U.S., this cartelization would be illegal, but they're based in Brussels or someplace, wherever Tom Shane goes to buy diamonds. The funny thing is there is some competition emerging for De Beers diamonds. That's lab-made diamonds. We now have the technology. We now have the technology to make diamonds in the lab, and only an expert can tell the difference. And the way they tell the difference is that there's some impurities in the natural diamonds, where the ones that come out of a lab are perfect, pure, I guess I should say. So De Beers has created the certification process where their diamonds are certified by test to be from the ground instead of from a lab, because really somebody cares about this stuff apparently. Anyway, if you were a lab diamond manufacturer, it might occur to you to sprinkle some impurities in there and beat their test, and they don't know how to tell fake impurities from real impurities. So it's sort of a comedy for those of us that aren't wedded to De Beers making a lot of profits off of our backs. But anyway, that control over key inputs is an important one. Alcoa used to own like 2,000 years of bauxite reserves, and it went back when it was a monopolist in the aluminum market, and the only reason to hold that much inventory is to keep rivals out. This can be a very powerful source of monopoly power. Another barrier to entry that can be important is control over that was the last one, is a government patent or copyright. So let's talk about patents and copyrights. So here, these kinds of arrangements are where the government has actually created a monopoly, and the government makes this deal: if you come up with a product that is new and that consumers like, we're going to let you have monopoly rights over making the profits associated with selling that product, that good or service, for 17 years in the case of a patent. And you can keep those profits. After 17 years, presumably, you'll be open to competition, but for 17 years, you can have that power. And we're going to see that in general, monopoly power hurts consumers. Output is restricted, price is raised, and consumers suffer. But for things like patents or new artistic productions produced and then copyrighted, we're going to see that without that patent protection, without that copyright protection, there really isn't an incentive for the inventor or the writer or the artist to develop a new product. Because if that producer were subject to intense competition right out of the gate, well, if you sink tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars into making a new drug, and once you succeed in that effort, anybody can just copy you and produce the generic, well, you're stupid, because your competitors just pay the pennies to make the generic. You spent all those millions to develop the product. And if there's competition, you don't get any of that back, so you wouldn't do it in the first place. This patents are a way to enable the innovators to keep the fruits of their innovation for some time, and is basically an incentive to get people to develop new products, or in the case of copyrights, new works of literature or art or music or theater that wouldn't be made in a competitive setting. So there would be no existence of the product without these government protections. Another source of monopoly power also comes from the government, and this is government license or government franchise. We don't need to worry about the difference between these two legal structures. But the basic idea here is where the government decides that the best outcome would just see one firm operating. And we talked a little bit about the Yosemite case at the beginning of this screencast. But another one is a lot of municipal services are structured this way. And here today was garbage day. That and daylight savings are why I was a little bit out of sorts this morning. But anyway, the city government decides we only want one company collecting all the garbage. That clogs up the roads and makes enough noise for our town. So we're only going to give a license for one firm to operate here. But in exchange for that, we're going to require that firm charge a lower price than it may otherwise do if it were an unregulated monopolist. And we'll talk in the next few days about regulatory strategies. Typically, governments say you can charge enough to get back a normal rate of return, but no more. And that strategy has some pros and cons that we'll talk about probably in another screencast. Not today, maybe Friday. Anyway, this is another government-created monopoly, and here there's some regulation by government to try to mitigate the restriction of output and raising a price that an unfettered monopolist would generally try to do, as we'll see. Another barrier to entry can be economies of scale, and in particular when what we'll call the minimum efficient scale is large relative to market demand at average total cost anyway, then we'll tend to see one or just a few firms dominate. And so I've got a picture of a firm whose production process is characterized by economies of scale. What do we mean by this? Well, you can see from this look at this cost curve, this pair of cost curves for the firm. I've got variable costs just constant at some fairly low level of expenditure, but there's some big old fixed costs associated with producing this product. And when we see a firm like this, and in our economy there's a lot of sectors where this is the case, what's going to happen is that for firms producing just a little bit of output, their unit costs, that's another word for average total costs, are going to be really high, and they're going to need a really high price to be able to make it. But for firms that produce a lot of output, well, their fixed costs can be spread over all that output, and their price can be fairly low. And we have concepts like minimum efficient scale. In this case, where the average total cost is just forever declining as I've drawn it, we would define minimum efficient scale as that where average total costs are just 10% higher than marginal cost, some definition like that. Anyway, when the minimum efficient scale is large relative to market demand, let's pretend for the moment there's a demand curve here, well, then we're only going to have one firm. Why? Because two firms would have to charge really high price, and one firm could just produce a ton more, charge a lower price, and there's only enough demand in this market to host one producer, and one of them's going to win, the other one's going to lose and be gone. Now, in markets like that, we tend to see just one, sometimes two. Depends on the nature of market demand. If there's enough for 20 firms at minimum efficient scale, if there's enough market demand, well, then we don't have a problem. But if we have market demand, let's draw a pretend one in there. If we have a market demand like, say, oops, I'm on my arrow instead of on my pen. If we have a market demand like this, well, by the time price gets low enough, there's only going to be one firm producing for this whole market. Two firms producing would need a much higher price than what this volume would enable if we just had one. So one firm's generally going to win that competition. We're going to see one, sometimes just a few. And this happens when market demand is small relative to the minimum efficient scale in that industry. The minimum efficient scale of producers in that industry, I should say. There's one last barrier to entry, another one that's really important in our today's economy, our information economy. Anyway, there can be network economies that act as barriers to entry. And here is where the usefulness of a product, a good or service, depends on how many other people are using that good or service. And operating system software was the example our textbook author used. But think of Facebook. There might be just some much better social networking platform out there, but if I went over there, of course I'm a bad example because I have so few friends even on Facebook, but if I went over there to some new platform, it's the Friends book platform. Well, it's me and two other geeks over there, and even if it's just a much superior platform, I want to be where my chances of finding a friend are much better, and the billions of people over on Facebook give me a chance that I just don't have over here on Friends book. So this kind of network economy can lead to very important monopoly power too.
Made with Doodlecast Pro.